Viewers, welcome to our brand new episode. This episode is entitled The Mind Game. A lot of athletes go through a lot of mental preparation before they compete. And some of the things that most athletes do manage and do control is stress. Stress is a very big part of sports. And today we are fortunate to have a special guest today with us to talk about everything about stress, how to manage stress, how to control stress. We are fortunate to have Alyssa with us. Alyssa is a sports and performance psychology major, and she'll be talking to us on everything about stress and how to cope with stress. So, Alyssa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, can you tell us about stress? Everything we know about what is stress and how do athletes cope with stress and how can they manage stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to start off, the definition of stress is the body's reaction to the demands that we put on it. So when we're looking at stress from an athletic or performance standpoint, this can be a cognitive stress, this can be an emotional stress, this can be a physical stress. So I think it's important to identify what that looks like for you individually, especially when you are being asked to perform a certain task and to perform it well. So that's kind of the definition of what stress is. The thing about stress, and I know we'll kind of get into this a little bit more, but stress can be a positive. I think there's been a negative connotation when thinking about stress, because typically when we talk about it, we're talking about it from that negative standpoint and from that negative perspective.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always have to be that. So that's kind of what I want to get into a little bit more. And yeah, just
Oh
to
yeah,
start.
I like to talk about positive stuff. So let's dive right into the positive aspect of sport. All we want to talk about is the positivity. So let's talk about the positive. What are the positives of stress?
Yeah. Yeah. I think stress is one of those things that can rely on the power of perspective a lot of times, right? So a lot of athletes will go through their sport, whether it be at practice or in a performance, and they can walk away from that without even recognizing that their body was under a state of stress, right? Because another term for it could be adrenaline, or another term for stress could be being in the zone, right? And so when we think about stress, I think it's important to identify two types of stress. And that would be eustress and distress. So when we think about eustress, we think about positive stress that enhances performance, right? So this might be playing under pressure and knowing that I'm confident in my abilities to be able to perform under this pressure.
Yeah.
That stress and that adrenaline can now be used for good because I know how to handle it. I know how to cope with it. I like it, right? Now, when that perspective has shifted and now we're talking about distress, we're thinking about the negative effects of stress that can now hinder your performance, right? So,
Yeah.
for example, that might be somebody who hasn't really nailed down a routine or nailed down, identified what is causing that stress, and now it's becoming where my arousal is raising or my anxiety is now increasing because of the stress.
Yeah.
So there's two different, I think, variations that this can go in, but I like the eustress. And that's kind of what I like to work on with my athletes when we are talking about these concepts.
So what about an athlete who have practiced, they've done all they have to do in practice and they go to a competition and all of a sudden the anxieties just kicked in and they're just shaking, they're butterfly in their stomach and all anxious. What are some advice would you give those type of athletes to be able to manage those kind of situation?
Yeah. I would be interested in knowing where that athlete is, and what maybe some major differences are between this specific performance and maybe performances that they've had in the past. I think it's super important to recognize that there are going to be differences in every single performance experience that we have, because every experience is going to bring different demands to us. And I think that's where self-awareness is one of those really crucial tools that we can build and apply in our tool set that we have as performers, that we have as athletes, is being able to self-assess what it is that I'm being asked to do that is creating this stress in my body, or that is creating this response in my body or in my brain or in my emotions. I think that it varies based on who the athlete is, right? And where they're at in their development. Are they able to recognize what these demands are and identify those things? And how quickly can they do it? But something I also stress a lot with the athletes that I work on is skills like self-awareness, skills like being able to identify what is causing my body to respond this way or my brain to respond this way. They take time and they take practice and they take conscious effort in being able to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question. I know I'm kind of going.
That answers the question. And I think you're right, because experience also plays a big role in how people manage stress. Like, for instance, like you're saying, athletes who have competed at the highest level, who have been there before, have done it a couple of times, they know how to manage a stressful situation. They've been there and they know how they came out of those kind of situations. So yeah, that really answers the question. So like for young athletes or athletes who are not exposed to the mind game, the psychological aspect of performance, what tips would you give them in managing stress? What tips would you give them in managing stress?
Yeah. Before I would go into, especially with young athletes, any type of stress management, I would really start with helping them identify and learn tools to be able to identify what it is that they are experiencing. With younger athletes in particular, every experience could be a new experience for them, right? Learning how to play against an opponent that is not very easy to beat. Coping with making mistakes, coping with receiving feedback that wasn't positive, coping with receiving positive feedback. So there's a lot of new things that young athletes are experiencing on a daily basis and that they're being challenged to experience. So being able to identify, okay, I'm dealing with this. This is a tool that I can use.
Yeah.
Or when I'm dealing with this is a tool that I can use, and trusting that preparation by being able to self-identify. I think that's always my go-to, especially with those younger athletes.
That is very refreshing to hear, and I think I agree with you, because as a young athlete, I remember when I was coming up, getting feedback from my coach. Sometimes you don't perceive it properly. You don't take it. You don't know how to perceive this kind of feedback, whether it being positive or negative. And there are a lot of athletes out there who are not exposed to the mental aspect of the game, because psychology plays like very crucial role. I know a former sports psychologist told me that training your mind is like you're training physically. If you train physically, you get better, and that's the same way you should train your mind. And once you train your mind like that, it's also gonna get. So you have to balance training your mind and your physical training. So what final thought would you give anyone watching out there, anyone who have not been exposed to this kind of topic, who will be following this episode to learn more about the psychological aspect of sports and performance? What advice will you give this person as the person follow this episode throughout and learn more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all, whether we talk about it or we don't, we all experience stress, and we've all, some maybe more than others, depending on where you are, where you're at in your development, in your experience, have more experience self-assessing and being able to recognize where I could use some help in dealing with stress or dealing with anxiety even, or dealing with adrenaline. So identifying where you are challenged the most in doing that, And especially those who are in a performance-based sport or a performance-based job where you are expected to perform at a high level for X amount of time to achieve this, right? It's important to recognize how your stress is playing a role in your performance. And if it's something that you are using and you are able to use as a tool, or it is something that is kind of creating a roadblock for you. And if it's being used as a tool and you enjoy the feeling that you get when you're being put under pressure, then that's great. Figure out why. Because if moving forward, there is an experience where you are challenged and that stress no longer feels good and it is taxing and it's challenging, you now have a foundation on how to get back to that performance enhancing eustress that we talk about. So if I were to give any advice to anybody listening, would be to take some time and really be real with yourself about how you perceive stress in your body and how it ultimately affects the way that you're able to do your job or your sport or anything that it is that requires some form of performance. And then moving forward, then you'd be able to create some type of plan or move forward in creating tools and tactics to address that.
Alyssa, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for giving us a lot of insight and a lot of perspective about stress. And anyone out there, this is the first episode, and I encourage you to continue to monitor and follow the Seancast for more exciting episode on the mind game. We'll be bringing this to you every month, and we are fortunate to have Alyssa on the show every month to give us insights and perspective about the mental aspect of performance. Thank you once again, Alyssa.